Awesome. Thank you for joining and welcome to our webinar on personalization using edge functions with Uniform and Netlify. My name is Alex Shyba. I'm here with Matt Biilmann. So a little bit about ourselves. I'm a CTO co-founder of Uniform. Uniform is a digital experience composition solution that enables developers and practitioners to work together on composing hyper-personalized, fast, and digital experiences. And we focus on time to value and overall user happiness. And I have Matt Biilmann with me, who doesn't need any introduction, but I'll do that anyways. Matt is Myth, the legend, Jamstack pioneer and co-founder and CEO of Netlify. Matt, would you like to say a few words, introduce yourself?
Yeah, great being here. Thanks for having me. I'm Matt Biilmann, CEO and co-founder of Netlify. We are a cloud platform for the web, built on the idea that today the right architecture for the web is really to decouple the web experience layer from the backend business logic layer. And if you do that, we can sort of provide a full end-to-end platform for that whole web experience layer, from connecting to building to deploying to operating and running your websites globally across the world. Excited to be here today.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining, Matt. So we have an action-packed agenda for you, and here we are taking an approach where there will be a little bit of context setting with slides, just a little bit, but we really want to get into the demo and show you the tech, and there's a lot of interesting angles here to consider. So we'll try to make as quickly as possible to the demos. And finally, we're going to wrap up with more of a business context, why this is really cool, why the edge side computing and edge side personalization is really important for your business, and hopefully it will make a business case for you to present to your colleagues and to your decision makers. And we'll spend some time on Q&A. Obviously, the session will be recorded as always, so it will be shared after that. And if you have questions, we have Q&A, and feel free to keep them coming. We will love questions. So with that in mind, Matt, I'd like to hand it over to you and ask you, how did it all begin? How it all started, and where this idea of edge computing added on top of the existing Netlify platform came about? What was the kind of primary motivation force that will help us understand the why a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, Netlify was really built around this idea of decoupling the web experience layer from the backend business logic layer. It's sort of the traditional architecture of the web was really that every website, a web app, a web store was one monolithic application with templates and business logic and plugins and data access all bundled together into one big monolith, right? Like, we predicted early on that we would move away from that model into a model where you would decouple the actual web UI, the web experience layer, into its own thing, and then the backend would start splitting into all these different APIs and services, where some are your own internal services, and a lot of them are other people's services, like Contentful or Stripe or Twilio or PlanetScale or the like, right? And we saw that if you decouple that web experience layer, there was a bunch of stuff that would become possible for a platform like ours, right? Like, we would be able to build one coherent workflow around CI/CD, around deployments, and so on. But one of the things that would also become possible was to treat it more like how we build for mobile phones, right? Like, where you build an application and you ship it to a client, and then the end user runs that application and talks to different APIs and services. So we quickly saw that one of the key benefits to this would be being able to ship your web UI to a globally distributed edge network, and build it, started to operate one of those, right? Then in the early days of this movement, when we coined the term Jamstack, if you were pre-building that web UI, it would be like mostly a set of static files that the edge could push straight into the end user's browser, together with, like, we always had a set of like declarative rules for proxying and rewrites and authentication and so on that could live at that edge layer as well, right? Like, but then if you wanted more dynamic functionality, we introduced like server-side functions that were still like, that are still running in some region, typically close to where your data is and so on. At the start of 2019, we started to deciding strategically like that as a company, we wanted to give developers working with Netlify a fully integrated way of writing code that would run directly on our edge network. We started out that journey prototyping around WebAssembly, but thought that like for actual web developers, the tool chain around that is very different than the tool chain for just writing and shipping JavaScript or TypeScript. Yeah. So moved from that and into building our own runtime on top of V8, similar to how Cloudflare has built their proprietary runtime on top of V8. Had launched this slide is from the Jamstack conference in 2020 in October, where we announced like at the private beta of what we called edge handlers back then, and sort of our first launch to the world, our vision of like how this platform would start including an edge transformation landscape. Then fast forward to the start of this year, after running at an extended private beta, we ended up seeing that this was much broader than Netlify, right? Like this edge runtime layer is starting to be sort of a core part of how the open web is going to look like. Frameworks like Next or 11t or SvelteKit or Remix are starting to build around the idea of this edge runtime layer existing as a primitive. And we decided that in line and sort of with our overall philosophy for the web, our take on that should be based on some true open standard and open runtime. That's always been the case for like end-to-end for anything you can run on Netlify. There's always a story of like, how can you take it and run it on your own server if you want, right? With serverless functions, the runtime was normally Node.js, right? Like, there's a bunch of reasons you can't really run Node in this kind of isolated edge setting. It's not built for security up front and so on. But fortunately, the creator of Node, Ryan Dahl, had started a new project called Dino. That's a new open source runtime for JavaScript built around security and isolation from the ground up, which makes it extremely well suited for these kind of edge environments. So we started a close partnership with the company behind Dino and launched edge functions at the start of the year based on Dino and fully integrated into Dino with a launch that included integrations into all the major front-end frameworks, Next, Astro, Hydrogen, Remix, SvelteKit, 11t, and so on. And today we are serving millions and millions of edge functions requests every month for a ton of different use cases.
That's awesome. So if for folks that are getting started with edge functions, but maybe they're familiar with serverless functions, lambdas, how would you connect the dots? Is it serverless but faster without cold startup, and you can do more with edge functions? Is that a fair assessment?
So there are a set of differences, right? Like the first piece is sort of more architectural, and I think if we go to the next slide, we'll talk a little more about just all the different rendering modes that sort of emerged in the ecosystem. Again, as I said in the beginning, like when we first launched Netlify, you had to choose between rendering at build time and outputting static HTML, or rendering in the client and taking sort of more of a single page application approach, right? Like, then we introduced in 2017 serverless functions as part of a stack. Gave you either, like, often they are used as a point to sort of create APIs for the front end, but they could also be used to do server-side rendering. And then we started seeing these hybrid approaches like ISR, DPR, DST, and so on emerge, where you would use serverless functions to build static assets on demand in one way or the other, with different patterns around refreshes and so on, right? Like, and I think typically all of those approaches tended to rely on like wherever you did data access, you would ideally be fairly close to where your data lived, right?
Yeah.
Now, edge functions put sort of a new layer on top of all of that, where you can both do edge rendering, right? Like, so especially Remix and SwelteKit are experimenting a lot with sort of moving dynamic rendering to the edge. The challenge there is still like, how do we actually get the data you are talking to the edge as well? And we'll still see a lot of like the traditional challenges with dynamic rendering around like security and upgrades and all of that be an issue once you start doing that on the fly. But if your data is available close to the end user, right? Like then it gives a lot of interesting potential that you can also run the code for that data close to the end user. And then we are seeing another potential for these edge functions, and that's been a really important part for our implementation of edge functions, to really make sure that they're well geared also to be a layer that sits in between the end user and your actual website or web store, and can do transformations on the fly.
So kind of like a proxy, but you don't have a web server, you have a CDN node and have a proxy layer, programmable proxy layer in front, right?
Completely programmable, right? Like both in terms of like you can do simple stuff like saying like if the user is authenticated, then just proxy through. If not, then redirect to this authentication page and set a cookie. But you can also do really advanced stuff like saying, if there is no cookie present in the browser, then inject a cookie consent form directly into the HTML on the page, so there's no sort of layout shift or anything like that the first time you go to a page from Europe, right? Like you can program all of that in. Is the user in Europe? Show this, otherwise don't inject it, right? Like you can build advanced tooling for things like experimentation, personalization, and so on, with these capabilities of taking static HTML, whether that static HTML is like built on the fly by server-side rendering, whether it comes from an on-demand builder, or whether it's statically built up front in the build step, right? Like you can sort of treat this transformation layer as the edge, as just one transparent layer that can work across all of your site without any like consideration for how the backend looks like. You can even proxy somewhere else and rewrite content from there, right?
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. I love that kind of incremental value add story here, where you already invested in Jamstack, you already have running Next.js or Gatsby or Nuxt, but you sometimes need that. Where's your redirects are running? You don't want a server for that, right? Where's your business logic that maybe can do routing or HTML transformation, can run traditionally done by a web server, but we don't want to go back to the origin. That sounds like a bad idea, going backwards in a way, right?
As someone whose company runs a lot of servers, I would recommend it if you have to not do it yourself.
Agreed. And yeah, so this actually the use case will be focusing on the right in our demos, which is kind of combining the benefits of static site delivery, but with the dynamicism of edge logic on top. There is some interesting. This is really a bridge gap filling, or we do some bridge gapping with this, or connecting two bridges. I don't know what I'm going here with, but yeah, the bridge. This is one of the most beautiful bridges in the world. So I'm biased. I'm based here in San Francisco.
I think you're totally right.
So with that in mind, we actually have 3 different demos prepared for you. One chapter is where Matt will.
I might be freestyling a little more than this slide indicates, but let's see.
Let's see. That's the beauty of this. So our goal is to set the context to help you understand how we connect with what we had before and what we have now, and what else can we do with all this power. So I'm gonna stop sharing and hand it over to Matt.
Okay, let's see if I can find the right screen. Here we go. Can you all see? And is the screen actually big enough and so on?
Yeah, that looks good. We see the command line and Chrome on the right.
Cool. Okay, let's do some. Let's see if I remember how to still do some code and make a little demo folder here. Spin up a code editor. We're going to start just with like the real primitives. I think I can trust this guy. And add just like a public folder with an with an index HTML. Let's just go in here and write some HTML.
Can you command plus plus a little bit just to get a little bit? There we go. Beautiful.
Better.
Thank you. That's a good start.
So this is great. And let's get an H1 in here that repeats our great message. Hello world. And then I'm just gonna set this up to be a Netlify project just as a start with a little TOML file. That's just gonna tell us that the published year for this is our public year, just so we know where to insert file from. And then spin up Netlify dev. Netlify dev, you can basically just spin up in any project, whether it's based on a framework or whether it's just like a pure static project. And you can get like a dev server running straight away that integrates sort of all of our platform end to end. So in this case, we have a little Hello World website going. Now let's start doing some fun stuff to this one. So I'm gonna add just a first edge handler Netlify edge functions. Let's just call this one hello.js. And this is going to be a little like piece of code that runs straight on the edge before we get to the actual static file. So I'm just going to export a default handler with a request and a context. And then in this case, we'll just start by returning a new response. Saying I'm rendered at the edge, just really straightforward. And then to tell Netlify where to run this edge function, we need a little edge functions clause here. We'll just say that right now we'll just run it for, let's try to just run it everywhere and say function equals hello. I need to actually.
Do you have extra brackets maybe there on line 4? No, well, that's expected.
Which functions? It all looks pretty right. What am I doing wrong? Second. Okay, loading the functions. Here we go. Just needed to.
Oh yeah, it's first time only, I think.
Yeah, just the first time, right? Like, so now we're actually just doing edge rendering, right? Like this is happening before we even get to our index file, and we're saying hello here, right? Like, I can of course
hijacked request response.
Yeah, so instead of this, I could I can just do nothing, right? Like, and now we're just passing through, nothing is happening, right? Like, so at any point we can decide to intercept something here, and here we could also do like a response that redirect to somewhere, right? Like, and obviously that makes that whole routing layer programmable. But we can also do things like saying, let's take the next step in the chain, basically. Let's make this one async. Take the next step in the chain, right? Like if you imagine these edge functions being chained together, and in the end you pass through them and you get to an origin, I can say, let me get the next step off the chain and get the response for that. And then let me get the body from that. I think we can just call text on it and say, okay, let's just get this as a text, and then do something silly like just returning a new response with this body to uppercase, and let's just keep the same header and everything. Let's see if this works. And let's see. Catch the response. How am I flicking on my let's see. How am I confusing myself this time around?
So is it not reading the body?
Give me 1 second.
Text. I think you need parentheses after text.
Yes, I just need the await response text. I was just skipping the body. This is it, yeah. It's just having body too much. Here we go. Hello world, right? Like
there
now we're doing it.
I was shouting
on the fly, like to shout anything we do here, right? Like now, of course, if we had some more advanced functionality, we would treat this as a text and like as a stream and do this as a fly. It's one of the differences between edge functions and sort of the core functions environment from Lambda that you can do streaming transformations and so on, right? Like, so there's a lot of possibility in this. I wanted just to show some of those in a slightly different context. Where if we just stop this demo and then go in and say npx create next app, call it demo 2, like we have you always have, like we always have these edge functions as sort of a Netlify layer that you can always like write rules that don't care about what's your framework, what's the underlying technology, anything like that, and do transformations, redirect, authentication, all of that. But we then also have some helpers. We have like our runtime for Next, and I'm going to just add a little library to this new Next project. Open a code editor again. We have a new Next project here. Again, from this project, I can just start Netlify dev. It will detect that it's a Next project and spin up the right dev server and everything. And if we go in and look at our index page, let's make this a little different. In this case, just to show this concept of how we can both modify like static files, ISR generated files, server rendered files. Let's export an async function, get server side props to turn this into like a server rendered page, right? Say props, title, hello world, and then let's make sure we actually use that somewhere. I'm gonna want to do some transforms, so I'm adding an idea so I can target this element and then putting in a title here, right? And let's see, okay, now we have like a server rendered index page from Next.js. Next.js has this concept of middleware that if you use Netlify, will run that in edge functions. It has this context where go in and export an async function middleware with a request and so on, right? Like out of the box, you can't do these transformations in that middleware, but if you go and pull in our little helper here, middleware request, then we can say, let's get a response from new middleware request based on this request where we call next, right? Like same pattern as before. And then let's try to do something a little silly here. We'll say if math random, like basically about 50% of the time, let's do an experiment, right? Like where we'll say we want a new title, and then we'll say, okay, response, replace text. We'll target the title element on the page and say, hey, put in this title, return the response. Now I'm gonna like run this. This I could obviously have done with a normal edge function, right? Like, but you'll see I get this like, whoa, unhandled runtime error, text contents does not match server rendered HTML. Next and similar frameworks like Gatsby and so on does this whole sort of hydration thing where they render everything on the server, and then once you get it in a client, they run JavaScript and render everything again. And if the two are out of sync, Next gets in a bad mood, right? Like, so here we've typed like we've plugged directly into Next's properties, so I can also go in here and set, okay, set the same title for the prop. And now we'll see, right? Like, hey, if I run this a couple of times, I should at some point get an experiment, unless I'm really unfortunate. I guess we got the experiment just a moment ago. That's what broke everything. I don't know why I'm not.
Oh, there we go.
I was really just that. What was the chances of that?
Do not buy a lottery
run at a
ticket today,
casino,
Matt.
right? Like, but I got the experiment, right? Like, and
Nice.
and that's again, like I can go in here and I can say let's get static props and make this like a static origin. It's still going to behave the same on this layer, right? Like, because this middle layer sits between, I can go in and say revalidate every 5 seconds and make it like an ISR generated page. It won't matter to the general architecture, right? And I think that this is what will make this layer really powerful, not just for like, obviously we're going to see these frameworks start sort of really plugging into the idea of rendering straight on the edge, right? Like, I'm sure we'll soon see like streaming React server components and so on, right? Like, but on top of that, I think we as long as you can actually do transforms on that layer, we can also like have people build tooling across that, libraries across that, that'll allow us to do really interesting things across across projects and pages and so on. And of course, if I deploy all of this, like let's start by just deploying the really simple demo project here, just because there's no build step, so it's like so easy, right? Like if we just run and push this to Netlify, I can create a new site, put it on my team, hello uniform world. Let's see if that is taken. No, that was free.
Nice.
And here we go. And if anyone is following along, once this goes live, we should all be able to see this little edge transformation in top on front of a static file. running globally around the world, right? Like with
milliseconds,
yeah, milliseconds of time, right? Like, so that was a couple of demos here. Anything else you want to see? You want to jump on to the fun uniform stuff?
I think this sets a perfect foundation for the next chapter, where we're actually going to pick up from here and see how we can use this powerful technology and help activate it for a non-developer user that may want to enable A/B testing or personalization on their site and do that every day, multiple times a day without developer involvement. So that's sort of where we can take this technology by bringing Uniform into the mix. So I'm gonna pick up where Matt left off here, and actually gonna you can also repeat the steps. There's some asterisks to that statement, but in general, you'll be able to follow along and create new project and build something following these steps. So we're gonna go and sign up for Uniform. You need a new account if you don't have one. This is a pretty easy process. There is a generous free tier you can get started with. Once you sign up, you're gonna have your first project and your first team. So I already have here created. I'm gonna save a few clicks. And in addition to that, I already have not just the Hello World starter with one page, one component just to get started, but also Netlify integration installed. And what that Netlify integration provides us is ability to activate that additional context that Netlify has at the edge. There is a whole rich geo object that we can actually use and do geo-based personalization with that. So that is manifest here in Quirks. This is our personalization capability that allows you to create any quirks. These are key value pairs of visitor context. This could be your audience, this could be country, this could be anything you can imagine that a visitor profile usually has that you want to activate from a personalization standpoint. But before we do that, let's take a look in the standard setup here. So I have a single page called home. We call them compositions because compositions can be modeling not just web pages, but mobile screens and other experiences. But we model a home page here. We have two personalization variants under personalization container, a default and a personalized one. Content here is stored inside of Uniform canvas, but typically you actually connect headless CMS and source content from your headless CMS or commerce engine if you're building commerce solution. And there's 14 headless CMSs to choose from. But to make it simple, we're just gonna use content as is. So you notice we have a personalized variant that renders we are launched, and it's only shown when signal equals launch campaign. So that's what the business user would do, is set this up. Because it's headless, we don't actually have front end yet. Let's hook it up. One thing we can do here is connect to one of the Hello World starters. We have example repo we can clone. I prepared a slightly more advanced example here, and this link will be shared later, where we already have a Netlify Edge function in place. So it also saves us a few steps. But I'm gonna need to connect to this project, so I'm gonna copy this environment variables, and I'm gonna bring that into my cloned repo, which is already here. And gonna just replace this real quick. And this allows me to go ahead and start the server locally. And I can do just a dev command. This is an XJS starter, so we also using that pretty standard. There is not a lot of dependencies here, just Next, React, and Uniform. So let's go ahead and render this out. And you can see I'm adding UTM campaign equals launch, because this is what will trigger that personalization. And you can see immediately we see we are launched content instead of the default content. And let's see this side by side, actually. I'm gonna go and open up the home page. And I'm gonna go and change my personalization hero, click save. And you can see nothing changed, but if I activate preview, we can actually see these changes happening live without even hard reloading the page. So it's all happening live and hot, and we already personalizing. This is pretty standard example. The signal is query string based, and you can see here, this is how it is defined and managed. This, I can also use cookie or anything that is on HTTP request, but I can also use quirks, and I can also use enrichments. So let's imagine that we have an example with where we want to do behavioral personalization. So I'm going to reset all of my contacts here, and I'm going to go create another page. And this page will be for developers. So behavior personalization entails two things here. First, we're going to create a page that will be tagged for developers. Hey, you are a developer. I'm going to save it, and I'm going to tag this page with persona developer. So I'm going to do that. And this means that next time I'm going to visit this page, let me remove this query string. You can see I have developers link showing up. Let me go get reset again. Let's go to the developers page. We're gonna get a score of 50 added to persona developer. So now we know that we have accumulated score 50. And this means that we can act on it and add personalization variant. That is, so you are developer, huh? And we're gonna target this for developers. There we go. Save it. So now if I go to my home page, now you can see this page is immediately personalized. At this point, I'm not using Netlify dev yet. This will be coming in a second. And the use case where I want to engage Netlify dev is geo-based personalization. You may have noticed we also have some signals for Canada, United Kingdom, and USA. These are top 3 countries based on our webinar participants. So let us go ahead and create this geo variants for USA. Hello, USA. And you can see I have a signal called USA, and create one more for Canada. And Canada, and another hero for hello, UK. Pretty simple. I'm just activating this United Kingdom. There we go. I'm going to publish this, and what I'm going to do is actually deploy this to Netlify. So I'm going to use the same command as Matt before, but I need a build phase, because what I'm going to do here is build my production version of my Next.js app that's using get static props. So it's completely static application. And it will also build and deploy this Netlify Edge function that I have enabled here. So while it's building that, I'll walk you through the process. First, here we ignore requests that are not page requests, because we only want to personalize pages and not all static resources. Then we set up a uniform context that will actually run and rewrite the page. And we activate these quirks. These quirks are actually extending the visitor context edge side. So here we're building Netlify specific quirks, so they pick up all the geo context and enrich it. And we also get CDP data. So if you have customer data platform in place, or a CRM, or any backend that owns visitor context, you can call to. This is an example, little small mock service that actually runs on Netlify functions as well, that returns us a visitor ID traits, some data that we actually push into the profile, and we can activate and personalize based on that. So even if you have external source of visitor context, if it's fast enough, if it can render in milliseconds as well, because you want to keep things fast edge side, you can plug it in additional fetch requests and enrich this visitor context from wherever it's coming from. So let's take a look how this works. It's actually deployed to production straight away. So I'm gonna go and open it up, and you should be able to open Edge p13n.netlify.app and experience the Edge site geo-based personalization. You can see I'm doing full page reload. I get my personalized Hello USA and check out performance. This is 50 milliseconds. We're still personalizing full page using geo context at the edge, and we're retaining characteristics, time to first byte characteristics of a static page. It's pretty amazing how fast this is. Now on top of that, you've seen a CDP use case. So we actually have a mocked endpoint here that is returning us some data, some traits coming from segment, or imagine any CDP that you may have in place. And if we want to, let's say, personalize based on whether the visitor is big spender or not, that context is owned externally. We can activate it really quickly. And I have two user profiles, user ID 1 and 2. One is a big spender, another one is not a big spender. So all I need is a pass different user ID. I do that through cookies. So if I have a cookie visitor ID that is set, I can actually activate it. So by, let me show you how that's actually done in the UI. Edit composition, there we go. So I'm gonna create another hero. Spending much, question mark, LOL. And I'm gonna target this to big spender. So big spender is using that quirk that's we've been exploring before, using that CDP quirk, and I'm gonna redeploy my site, and I should be able to activate this feature that's targeting a big spender quirk. It's either true or false, and I have a signal he created. Pretty simple setup. Every time big spender is equals true, we have a score 50 added to the profile, and we can personalize based on it. I think once this is deployed, we should be able to see this in action, and we're on the final step of deployment process. But I need to set the cookie. So my cookie set is actually in another browser. And I have my visitor ID set to 1. So we can imagine some tracker sets this value. This is, I guess, just for as an example. And this will activate is that edge site fetch of our quirk data from that fake CDP that we were using. You can see I just refreshed the page. We have new deployment, and we're seeing spending much. And if we explore our quirks in our profile, you can see big spender is in fact true. That's what we see in this data. So it's not just for data that's on the edge. You can bring external data context, and I mean, sky's the limit in this case. You have fetch and you have external APIs, but the cool thing is that it happens outside of the browser. So if you remember, you used to need to have a server before just to be the proxy between your private API and the browser. You can actually use the edge layer for that and do all this fancy goodness. So that's demo 3. Some key takeaways here. QR code, if you want to check out the starter repo, it's shown on the screen. If we wanted you to take home with you is five points. This is really the fastest way to run personalization without servers, and that could be anything depending on your use case. Every business defines personalization sort of differently, and you have to ability to activate it without developer involvement once it's activated. So it's not just cool tech; it's cool tech that your business users would appreciate, because they can do personalization and key performance characteristics that are just out of this world. So it's really an incremental addition to your stack. It doesn't really change the way you build apps, and super easy to get going. If there's something we hoping this will help you to make a case for your business folks that understand conversion lifts. They understand how performance affect the bottom line. This equation gives you both performance and personalization, and not just performance under 5 users, performance under any load, because you have elasticity of CDN to scale, so that no cold start, elastic scale, and no servers involved. But all of that power and experimentation and personalization that gives amazing results on for your business. And Matt has quite a few success stories how just addition of this fast modern web platform Netlify, what kind of results that the brands are seeing. So imagine combining that with personalization, you get kind of a double whammy here. That's my end of my sales speech as a developer. Hopefully this will make a stronger case for you to adopt this technology within your organization. And yeah, if you haven't heard, if you live in under the rock, if you haven't heard about Jamstack Conf, it's coming. So make sure you register, and you can get a nice discount by following this.
It's the first in-person Jamstack conference since 2019, right? Like we had the last in the end of 2019, and then had big plans for Jamstack conferences in 2020 that got all changed to virtual conferences. So this time, November 7th and 8th in San Francisco. It's going to be a lot of fun, like just all of the community and the ecosystem coming together. It's going to be an online path to the conference as well. We're going to be streaming everything, but being there, meeting all the different people in the space and so on, it's going to be a lot of fun.
I cannot wait. There's something magical about going to your first in-person conference. I had mine recently, and just I cannot explain how awesome it felt. So that's hopefully your first in-person event after this break will be Jamstack Conf. Hope we'll see you there.
Yeah.
And we have thanks, Matt. Any closing thoughts from you?
And there's some questions in the chat and in the QA section. Like there's a question on running edge functions for very big e-commerce websites compared to static websites. I mean, anything you do dynamically, of course, there'll always be some burden to running it, right? Like, but I think the beauty of these is that like these are functions that if you gear them to really just be doing transformations, inject personalization rules and so on, you can get them incredibly fast and incredibly efficient. You can get very, very close to the performance characteristics of a purely statically built e-commerce site, while solving some of the challenges that can come with a static site, especially for very big e-commerce websites where you really want to do some personalization. You don't want you want people to land straight off the page and have some of it personalized. And I think its function can be pretty transformative for that. There's also some questions on third-party tools like Google's Optimizer, Google Optimizer, and WP Engine, and so on. Like obviously, those tools won't run in this layer straight away. But I think even what Alex was showing today is how different vendor can use this as a building block to actually build automated tooling, where I think in the beginning, individual developers will build stuff for their specific sites as this layer. But I think over time, we'll see more and more vendors offer tooling that you can just plug in that layer and give capabilities like what Alex just showed.
Yeah, it's exciting. Just sky's the limit here, really. And in terms of all the things you can do, component injection. I think I showed an example. If you have a layouting engine like Uniform Canvas is a good example of that. We can inject components at edge side under specific criteria, so you can even do like dark launching of components if you wanted to. but personalization is an example of how injection could take place. But you can probably take it injection in kind of standard DOM manipulation level. You have HTML rewriter capability, and you can, I mean, you have access to the whole response, so you can do pretty much anything you can imagine here.
Yeah.
There was another interesting question about performance metrics in enforcement. If you have this external service that provides you data context, like visitor context, and it is slow, taking too long, and if there are timeout, can that be managed? We actually had that implemented as a sort of SLA towards time to first byte. So if the service doesn't respond for more than 200 milliseconds, for example, you can just serve default, or you just skip waiting in this case. So you would prioritize performance over time to first byte. Obviously, nothing is free. So if you do have a slow API endpoint, it will affect time to first byte if you're not careful. It cannot run for seconds, right? So at that point, you may want to do this asynchronously instead of blocking. But you can also just with fetch client do like an SLA and cut out the waiting time if it exceeds certain criteria. So definitely. And working top to bottom. Question about so is edge rendering going to replace SSG, SSR, and ultimately ISR? Man, how do you see this whole spectrum evolving? Will there be consolidation, or there will be kind of best tool for the job?
People keep going back and forth in these different directions, but I think there's just some fundamentals that will always stay through. If you have the ability to build something statically and separate the runtime environment from any of your data access and business logic, you get a set of inherent advantages in terms of like the reliability of that, the ability to do rollbacks and so on, and the security layer, right? Where you just know that once you put it out there, it's never like, you never have to jump in and do an update because of a zero-day exploit and so on. So I think that piece of it will always stick around. There's just some inherent qualities that are fundamental to that technique, and that goes away once you add like a dynamic access, especially to your APIs and data layer that can cause security issues, right? Yeah. But outside of that, I think we're gonna see a lot of the things that you had to do in the client in the browser before shift to this runtime layer, right very close to the client on the edge. And there's a lot of potential in that. I think the challenge with like moving everything to like streaming edge rendering is that no one is really going to move all their data to live all over the world. It's just not cost efficient.
Especially visitor profile data that's really will mutate frequently. That's a challenge.
That's challenging, right? Like, and so I think realistically, we'll always see a combination of these techniques, and then the pendulum will swing a little back and forth between like how much are you server-side rendering, how much are you building up front, and how much are you running in the client. But I think the access to writing code that runs globally close to the user as part of your normal web stack with this level of like, I mean, just imagine what you saw in my little demo, right? Like I'm just writing a little function that transforms my HTML and running Netlify deploy, right? Like the access to deploying that HTML and that server-side code to a global edge network running all over the world with this flexibility is pretty revolutionary when we think about it, right? Like, and of course, like we've seen like a lot of work in building things like global data stores, from Spanner to Fauna to Cockroach, Planet Scale, and all of that, right? But building stuff on the web that actually took advantage of that was operationally incredibly hard, right? Like now it's incredibly easy, and we'll see a lot of evolution happen because of that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's all use cases based, right? It all depends. But the fact that you have that freedom of choice and find the right rendering paradigm for use case, this is extremely powerful. And you can combine, so SSG can be combined with Edge, so you don't have to re-render the whole page at the edge, but you can transform it after it's rendered. So that can get you very far with existing paradigms as the edge rendering is becoming more mainstream. Content API is becoming faster. Then it will become a really robust option, I think. But it's all about choice. And thank you so much for your question, Francesco. We have, I think, time for one more from Vadim. Is it possible to run edge functions in a plain Dino runtime, or is it only Netlify scoped? That's an interesting question.
Yeah, and in our case, it really is the full Dino runtime that these functions run in. There's no like when you run an edge function with Netlify Dev, we in the background, if you don't have Dino, we download Dino and use Dino run to spin these up, just like normal Netlify functions run in Node, and it's the full Node environment, right? Like so, and when you deploy to Netlify, they run with the full Dino runtime in the cloud. So it's very important to us that it's like the full open standards and
nice. Yeah, that's why. And maybe last question from Chris. Does all the processing on the server make DDoS easier since so much processing is happening on the edge? That's an interesting angle. So if there's no servers, there's DDoSing becomes harder.
I mean, I would say again, when you ask about that question on static, ISR, edge rendering, and so on, right? Like, the more you push towards a fully dynamic model where you're talking to your data sources for every request, the harder resiliency and uptime becomes in general, right? Like if you're doing if every request talks to your headless CMS or whatever, right? Like eventually there's going to be a traffic level where even if your headless CMS vendor is not going down, they might just rate limit you or something to protect their network, right? Like if you're pushing a lot of compute into these edge handlers, there'll also come a point where you'll be more at risk for like massive traffic spikes generating so much CPU usage that even if your vendor could keep your site running, it might not be responsible to do it for financial reasons, right? Like, so there's always that level of scale where like the less compute you do when someone views one of your pages, the more resilient the system you're building, both from a security and reliability perspective, right? I think in general, edge functions gives us a layer where if we thread the needle right, we can do a lot of very powerful transformations on top of things that are incredibly resilient without sacrificing much resilience, right? Like, but just realistically, the more compute you do on servers for your clients, the more cost you incur for many clients, and and that just changes the levels for like what level of traffic can you sustain, whether it's during an attack or whether it's during normal usage. I would say like for normal usage of edge functions for these kind of use cases, like you won't see any problems for us sustaining. And of course, with a platform like Netlify, we also have a bunch of mitigation techniques sitting in front of your edge functions against actual attacks. We'll do a lot of rate limiting and throttling and detection and so on.
Awesome, fantastic. Well, we ran a little bit late, but we got through most of the questions. So thank you so much, folks, for joining, spending part of your morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you're joining from. And thank you so much, Matt, for spending time and showing us really cool demos. And yeah, feel free to reach out if you have any questions, any follow-ups. And yeah, hope to see you next time at maybe a Jamstack Conf.
Yeah, see you at Jamstack Conf.
Cheers. Bye.